Miss Marple had solved many crimes, but nothing prepared her for the day a soft-spoken stranger calmly confessed to murder. Welcome to the Velvet Murmurs, where every whisper hides a secret. I am so glad you joined us for today's mystery. Before we began, tell us in the comments where you are tuning in from. We love hearing from mystery lovers from all over the world. The darkest investigation of her life. Chapter 1. The Driver Who Never Came Home. It was a soft grey morning in early October when Miss Jane Marple arrived at the quiet village of Renshaw Fold. The gentle drizzle gave the streets a silver sheen, and the hedges lining the narrow lanes glistened as if dusted with powdered glass. Most visitors described the little village as peaceful, almost drowsy, but Miss Marple often said that quiet places were the ones to watch, because wickedness, much like mildew, grew best in corners where no one looked too closely. She had come to stay for a fortnight with her dear friend Mrs. Martha Willoughby, a cheerful widow with a fondness for knitting and neighbourhood gossip. But as Miss Marple stepped inside the modest cottage on Whitby Road, she sensed at once that something was different. A tension hung in the air, thin, sharp, and uneasy, like the faint hum before a storm. Martha confirmed it as soon as the teapot was set down. "Jane, my dear, something dreadful has happened," she whispered, lowering her voice though no one else was in the room. "Our village driver, Mr. Henry Carver. He never came home last night." Miss Marple raised her eyebrows. "Never came home? That does sound unfortunate." "Unfortunate?" Martha leaned closer. "Henry was the most punctual man in Renshaw Fold. If he said he'd return by 6, he returned by 6. He kissed his wife on the cheek before leaving yesterday morning, told her he'd be back by tea time, but he never arrived. His wife was up all night pacing." Miss Marple stirred her tea slowly, the way she always did when thoughts began forming in the quiet corners of her mind. "And where had he gone?" she asked gently. "With a stranger?" Martha replied, pressing a hand to her chest. "A man no one here recognized came straight to Henry's employer, Mr. Lionel Grant. You know, the businessman who rents the upper suite of the red brick house. Asked for a driver to take him to the countryside. No luggage, no introduction. Only a name, Mr. Devlin." Miss Marple's spoon paused mid-air. "Devlin?" she repeated softly. Martha misunderstood her hesitation. "Oh, I don't mean anything sinister. Plenty of travellers pass through the fold." "Yes," Miss Marple murmured, "but travellers who appear suddenly and vanish even more suddenly. Those, my dear Martha, are the ones a body ought to be curious about." Before the conversation could deepen, a frantic knock rattled the front door. Martha hurried to open it, and in stepped Mrs. Eleanor Carver, Henry's wife. Pale, trembling, and soaked from the drizzle, she looked as if she hadn't slept even a minute. "Mrs. Willoughby," she gasped, "I'm sorry to intrude. I didn't know where else to go." Martha guided her to the chair beside Miss Marple, who watched her with warm, steady eyes. "My dear," Miss Marple said softly, "take your time. Tell us what troubles you most." Eleanor swallowed hard. "It's Henry. I fear something terrible has happened to him." Her voice cracked, and she clutched the edges of her shawl. "He left at 11:30 yesterday with that strange man Mr. Grant introduced him to. Said he'd deliver the gentleman to a place near Hazelbrook. That's only an hour's drive. He should have been home long before dusk." "Did he send word?" Miss Marple asked. "No, nothing. And his employer says he never returned to collect his wages either." Eleanor's breath shuddered. Henry would never do such a thing. Never. A tear slid down her cheek. Miss Marple leaned forward, speaking in a calm, motherly way. "When exactly was he last seen?" "At the gate outside our cottage," Eleanor whispered. He looked back and said, "Keep the kettle warm for me. I shall not be long." And those were his last words. A silence fell, the kind that sinks into the floorboards and chills a room. Miss Marple broke it gently. "Mrs. Carver, may I ask something rather important? Did your husband seem uneasy before leaving?" or hurried, or unusually quiet? She expected Eleanor to think for a moment. Instead, the answer came immediately. "Yes," Eleanor said. He hesitated. Martha and Miss Marple both looked at her. Eleanor continued shakily. "The man, Mr. Devlin, stood strangely. Too still. His voice was soft, but something about him frightened Henry. I saw it. When Henry stepped into the motor car, he kept glancing at the rear-view mirror." Miss Marple pressed her fingers together thoughtfully. A nervous driver, a silent stranger, a journey to a remote countryside lane, a promise to return. Broken. Miss Marple had seen this pattern before, in different villages with different faces but the same ghostly outline, a disappearance wrapped inside an ordinary errand. "Has the police been informed?" Miss Marple asked. "Yes," Eleanor said. "This morning, but they believe he may have driven off on his own. They say men sometimes do without warning." Her voice sharpened with sudden anger. "Henry is not men. Henry is Henry, and he would never abandon me." Miss Marple nodded sympathetically. "Indeed, people who do not understand a household often make foolish assumptions about it." She stood slowly. "Mrs. Carver, may I accompany you back to your cottage? I'd like to see where Henry was last seen." Eleanor looked confused. "Will it help?" "It might," Miss Marple said with her faint, determined smile. "Often the smallest detail overlooked by everyone else is the one that whispers the truth." The cottage was a small, tidy place with a white picket fence and climbing roses pressed against the walls. The gate hung slightly open, swinging when the wind stirred. Miss Marple paused there. "You see," she murmured to herself, "gates tell stories. They are very often forgotten by people, but not by criminals." Eleanor watched anxiously as Miss Marple examined the ground. The gravel path showed 2 sets of tire marks, one deep, one lighter. "Mrs. Carver," Miss Marple said softly, "your husband's motor is a modest old one, is it not? It would leave lighter tracks." "Yes," Eleanor whispered. "Then the deeper tracks belong to Mr. Devlin's motor." She traced the edge of the tire mark. Rather an expensive vehicle for someone who needed to hire a village driver. Eleanor's eyes widened. Martha Willoughby gasped, "Jane, do you think Henry was taken somewhere against his will?" Miss Marple didn't answer. Instead, she rose slowly, the wind lifting the brim of her hat. Something cold passed through her expression, the quiet certainty she always felt when evil had brushed past. She looked at the empty road stretching toward Hazelbrook. "My dear Martha," she said quietly, "I fear Mr. Henry Carver did not simply fail to return." She turned to Eleanor with gentle sorrow. "I fear, Mrs. Carver, that your husband never had the chance to come home." And with those words, the story and the darkness beneath Hazelbrook had truly begun. Chapter 2. Another man missing. The morning after Eleanor Carver's visit, Renshaw Fold felt strangely heavy, as if the village itself was holding its breath. People spoke softly. Doors opened and closed with unusual care. Even the birds seemed quieter than usual. Miss Marple, however, was awake early. She believed that quiet mornings often revealed the things that noisy days tried to hide. After a light breakfast, she wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and stepped outside for a short walk. She had not gone far when she saw Inspector Aldridge coming down the lane. He was tall and kindly, but he often missed the smaller details, the ones Miss Marple always noticed. "Good morning, Miss Marple," he said with a polite nod. "I hear you arrived just yesterday. I hope the village stays peaceful for you." Miss Marple smiled gently. "Peaceful places are never quite what they seem, Inspector. I believe you have already discovered that?" Aldridge sighed. "You must mean the missing driver." "Yes, unfortunate business. But I am sure we will find a sensible explanation." Miss Marple tilted her head. "Do you truly think so?" He paused, rubbing his chin. "His employer said the man who hired Henry gave the name Mr. Devlin, but no visitor by that name stayed in any inn or guest house. So he vanished Miss Marple said softly. Yes, vanished, Aldridge agreed. Before they could continue, a young constable rushed toward them, breathless and holding a telegram. "Inspector, message from Palewood," he shouted. Aldridge took the telegram, opened it, and frowned deeply. "Another driver missing." Miss Marple's voice remained calm. "When did this one disappear?" "Last night," Aldridge said slowly. "Left with a customer around the same time Henry Carver did. Never returned." Miss Marple tapped her parasol lightly on the ground, a habit she had whenever her mind pieced together an invisible pattern. "Inspector," she said, "may I suggest that this is no coincidence?" Aldridge exhaled. "That thought crossed my mind too. Because the second disappearance happened only 7 miles away, Miss Marple offered to accompany the inspector to Palewood. He agreed, partly because he respected her judgment, and partly because he feared what they might find. The small town was busier than Renshaw Fold, but an air of worry floated over the streets. Outside the Palewood taxi stand, a crowd had gathered. A thin, elderly woman wiped her nose with the edge of her shawl. Her name was Mrs. Grantley, the mother of the missing driver. She stepped forward at once when she saw the inspector. "Please, sir," she cried, "you must help me. My son Thomas never came back last night. He always returns. Always." Miss Marple watched the woman closely. Fear lay deep in her eyes, but something else too, a sudden and painful recognition of danger. "Mrs. Grantley," Miss Marple said kindly, "did your son tell you anything before he left?" "Yes," the woman replied in a trembling voice. "He said the man who hired him was quiet. Too quiet. Thomas said the fellow stared at him in a way that made him uneasy." Miss Marple looked at Aldridge. She did not need to speak. He could see her concern. She asked, "Did your son mention the man's name?" Mrs. Grantley nodded. "Yes, he said his name was Mr. Devlin." A gasp rose from the small crowd. Miss Marple closed her eyes for a brief moment. The pattern was now clear. 2 villages, 2 drivers, 2 strangers, 1 name, and silence after each journey. Aldridge spoke with the taxi owner, a stout man with a worried face. Miss Marple walked quietly around the stand, observing the small signs of disorder. A pencil dropped under a chair, a teacup untouched, a blanket folded too quickly. She stepped outside and studied the thin mud near the road. A set of tire marks curved sharply before heading toward the countryside road. Miss Marple bent down carefully. "These are fresh." A voice behind her asked, "What do you see?" It was the inspector. "These marks," she said, pointing gently, "are heavier than what the Palewood taxis usually make. This is the same pattern I saw outside Mrs. Carver's gate." Aldridge frowned. "You mean the same car took both drivers?" "I believe so," Miss Marple answered. "And whoever sat behind the wheel knew how to make a driver uncomfortable without speaking a single word." She looked toward the hillside path that led to Hazelbrook. "Inspector," she said softly, "may we go to the place where Thomas was last seen?" "Of course," Aldridge replied. "The owners said he drove toward the Hazelbrook Road." Miss Marple nodded. "Then that is where the truth also went." The countryside stretched far and quiet around them. The road was narrow, lined with tall grass, and the wind carried the smell of wet earth. Miss Marple stepped slowly, taking in every detail. The way the grass leaned, the marks on the dirt, the silence of the trees. At one point, she stopped. "What is it?" Aldridge asked. Miss Marple pointed to a patch of flattened grass. "A car stood here for some time. The ground is pressed very firmly. Someone stepped out, and someone else did not step back." Aldridge stooped beside her. "But there are no signs of a struggle." "No," Miss Marple replied gently, "because the killer does not need to struggle. He chooses drivers who trust him. He chooses lonely roads, and he chooses moments when a man is off his guard." They walked farther, until the road curved toward a small bridge. Beneath it ran a slow, dark canal, its waters deep and still. The sight seemed to trouble Miss Marple in a way she did not express aloud. "Inspector," she said quietly, "places such as these are chosen, not by chance." Aldridge looked confused. "Chosen for what?" Miss Marple's voice was low but steady. "For things meant never to be found." The inspector stared at the canal. "Do you think—" Miss Marple raised a hand gently. "Not yet. We must not let our minds run ahead of our proofs." But inside, she already felt a shadow forming, a shadow dark enough to match the water below the bridge. By the time they returned to Renshaw Fold, Miss Marple had begun forming a picture in her mind. It was faint, like a sketch drawn with the lightest pencil, but she knew it would grow stronger with each small detail. 2 drivers gone. 1 stranger seen twice, a calm voice, a still posture, a false name, and a path that always led toward Hazelbrook. As Miss Marple stepped into Martha Willoughby's cottage, Martha rushed forward. "Jane, did you learn anything?" Miss Marple removed her gloves slowly. "Yes," she said. "I learned that evil sometimes travels quietly, and it often returns to the same place." Martha shivered. "Do you think Henry is alive?" Miss Marple looked at the fading evening light through the window. After a long pause, she spoke softly. Too softly for anyone but Martha to hear. "I fear, dear Martha, that we must now search for truths no one wishes to know." The chapter closed with the sound of rain beginning again, soft and steady, as if the sky itself understood the sorrow that was still to come. Chapter 3. A Stranger. Too calm. 3 days passed since Henry Carver and Thomas Grantley vanished. The village grew nervous, doors were locked earlier, people walked in pairs, even the children who usually played outside without fear stayed close to their mothers. Miss Marple watched all of this quietly. She never panicked, but she understood fear very well. Fear always meant people had begun to sense the truth, even if they did not speak it yet. On the morning of the 4th day, Inspector Aldridge arrived at Martha Willoughby's cottage, carrying a file under his arm. His face looked different, tense, thoughtful, and a little tired. "Miss Marple," he said quickly, "we've had a development." "Good morning to you too, Inspector," Miss Marple replied gently. "Please come in. You look as though you have not slept." He managed a small smile. "It feels that way." Martha poured tea, while Miss Marple folded her hands and waited. Aldridge opened the file. "A man came to the station this morning, elderly, grey-bearded, calm, said he had information about our missing drivers." Martha gasped. "Did he tell you where they are?" Aldridge shook his head. "Not exactly. He said only this: they are not coming back." A thick silence followed. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly. "What else did he say?" "He told us he knew those men," Aldridge continued. "He claimed he had hired them, first Henry, then Thomas." Martha clasped her hands tightly. "Then where are they? Did he harm them?" Aldridge looked troubled. "That is the strange part. The man did not seem frightened. He did not deny anything. In fact, he spoke as if he expected no punishment at all." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed gently. "Describe him, Inspector." Aldridge thought for a moment. "He is around 60, white beard, soft voice, walks slowly, sits with a straight back, and his eyes are strangely calm." Miss Marple's fingers tapped her teacup. "Calm, you say? Calm in what way?" "As if nothing surprises him," Aldridge said, "as if he has already lived through everything." Miss Marple exchanged a quiet look with Martha. People guilty of small lies looked nervous. People guilty of great crimes often looked composed, too composed. Miss Marple sighed softly. "I would like to see him." Aldridge nodded. "I thought you might say that. He is at the station." The station was a small brick building near the village square. When Miss Marple entered, the constables seemed tense. Something in the air felt heavy, almost cold. Aldridge led her down the hallway toward a small interview room. "He said he will speak again," Aldridge whispered. But I warn you, Miss Marple, I cannot tell whether he is mad or telling the truth." Miss Marple gave a small smile. "Inspector, madness is often far less dangerous than a man who believes he is perfectly right." They entered the room. The elderly man sat alone on a wooden chair. His hands rested neatly on his lap. His beard was long and white, but well kept. His clothes were simple. He looked up as they came in and smiled politely. "Good morning," he said in a gentle voice. Miss Marple studied him carefully. There was no fear in him, no confusion, only a deep stillness, almost unnatural. Aldridge cleared his throat. "This is Miss Marple. She's assisting us." The man nodded. "I know you have eyes that see the small things. That is useful." Miss Marple pulled a chair and sat across from him. "May I know your name?" she asked softly. He smiled faintly. "Some call me Mr. Devlin these days." Aldridge stiffened. "That is the name you gave the drivers?" "Yes," the man said simply. "It is a pleasant name, light on the tongue, easy to say." Miss Marple kept her gaze steady. "Mr. Devlin, you told the inspector that the drivers are not coming back." He nodded. "That is correct." Martha, who had followed them in, gasped and put a hand over her mouth. Miss Marple continued in the same calm tone. "And how do you know that?" Devlin looked at her with soft, polite eyes. "I know because I was with them at the end." Aldridge stepped forward. "The end of what?" "The end of their journey," Devlin answered. "The end of their troubles, the end of their breathing." Miss Marple's heartbeat slowed, not from fear, but from the heavy truth settling in the room. "And where," she asked quietly, "did their journey end?" Devlin looked thoughtful, almost as if remembering something peaceful. "At the Hazelbrook Canal," he said. "A very deep place, very quiet. The water takes what is given to it." Aldridge felt his throat tighten. "You mean—" "Yes," Devlin replied gently. "The water has them now." Miss Marple did not move. Her voice remained steady. "Why the canal?" Devlin folded his hands. "Because it is perfect. Still water hides everything. No struggle, no sound, no trace." His tone was almost peaceful, like a man describing a beautiful garden. Miss Marple spoke again, her voice soft but firm. "Why did you do it, Mr. Devlin?" The man's eyes changed for the first time, a brief flicker of something cold. "I did not kill them to harm them," he said quietly. "I killed them to use them. A doctor must make use of what is available." Aldridge stared in horror. "A doctor?" Devlin nodded calmly. "I was one once." Miss Marple felt a chill pass through her. This was not an ordinary criminal. This was a mind that had chosen a path long ago and walked it without remorse. She leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Devlin," she said, "why come to the police at all? Why speak of this now?" The man smiled gently, a smile that felt colder than any truth he had spoken. "I did not come to confess," he said. "I came to see your faces. I came to watch the moment when you understand that you cannot find what the water has eaten." He looked straight at Miss Marple. "And I wanted to see if you are as clever as they say." Miss Marple did not flinch. "Cleverness is not needed," she said softly. "Only patience." Devlin laughed quietly, a soft, strange sound. "We shall see." As Miss Marple left the room, Aldridge followed her. "What do you think of him, Miss Marple?" he asked quietly. She stopped at the doorway. "I think," she said slowly, "that he is telling the truth." Aldridge felt his stomach drop. Then Henry. "Thomas." "Yes," Miss Marple whispered. "I fear they are gone." The inspector braced himself. "But we must find the bodies." Miss Marple shook her head gently. "Inspector, some places do not give back what enters them." She looked out at the road leading to Hazelbrook. "And some men choose such places very carefully." Chapter 4. Secrets beneath the elder tree. The news of Devlin's strange confession spread quickly through Renshaw Fold. People spoke in whispers. Curtains moved each time footsteps passed on the road. A feeling of deep unease settled over the village, like a cloud that refused to lift. Miss Marple, however, stayed calm. She always said that panic only helped the guilty, never the innocent. On the morning after the interview, she walked to the police station to speak with Inspector Aldridge again. She found him sitting at his desk, staring at a map of the countryside. "Good morning, Inspector," she said softly. Aldridge looked up, his eyes tired. "Miss Marple, I can't stop thinking about that man, the way he spoke, so calm, so confident." "Yes," Miss Marple nodded. "Men who speak like that have already accepted the worst inside themselves." Aldridge rubbed his forehead. "He claims he left there." He hesitated. "He claims he left evidence near the canal, but he refuses to say exactly where." Miss Marple sat down. "Inspector, he wants you to search. This is a man who enjoys watching confusion, but even the cleverest criminals leave something behind." Just then, a young constable entered the room. "Sir, the old man is asking to speak again," he said. Aldridge and Miss Marple exchanged a quick glance. They walked together to the interview room. Devlin sat exactly as before, straight back, hands folded, eyes calm. He looked up and smiled politely. "Ah, you returned." Miss Marple stepped forward. "You asked for us?" "Yes," he said. "I wish to show you something. A small place. The beginning of truth, you might say." Aldridge stiffened. "You are willing to take us somewhere?" Devlin nodded. "Yes, I believe it is time." Miss Marple kept her voice gentle. "Where is this place?" "You will see," Devlin said simply. There was something unsettling about his tone. Not fear, not regret, only a strange satisfaction. After some hesitation, the inspector agreed. 2 constables escorted Devlin while Miss Marple and Aldridge followed behind in a police car. The road toward Hazelbrook looked cold and lonely. The trees stood still as if listening. The air felt heavier than usual. Miss Marple watched Devlin through the window. His expression did not change. He looked like a man on an afternoon walk. Finally, the car stopped near an open field. "There," Devlin said, pointing to a tall, old elder tree, standing alone beside a narrow footpath. Miss Marple felt a faint chill. The tree was large, with thick roots and heavy branches that cast a dark shadow on the ground. "Why this place?" Aldridge asked. Devlin smiled. "Because this is where I left the first proof." The constables held him while he stepped slowly toward the tree. He touched the bark gently, almost affectionately. "Dig beneath this side," he said, tapping the ground with his shoe. Aldridge ordered the constables to start digging. The soil was soft. After only a few minutes, one constable shouted, "Sir, something is here!" Miss Marple stepped closer. A small green envelope lay inside the shallow hole. It was slightly damp, but intact. Aldridge opened it carefully. Inside was a simple card, an identification card. Miss Marple recognized the picture at once. Henry Carver. Martha Willoughby later said she felt her heart stop when she heard the name. Aldridge swallowed hard. "How did this get here?" Devlin answered in his calm voice. "I placed it there. I knew one day someone would come looking." Miss Marple spoke quietly. "Why would you hide only the card, not anything else?" Devlin looked at her with a soft smile. "Because the water keeps the rest," he said. "The water is hungry." Aldridge clenched his fists. "What about Thomas Grantley? Where is his proof?" Devlin nodded toward a narrow walking trail. "Not far, close to the little canal path." Miss Marple walked slowly behind them. She noticed every small detail. The angle of the tire marks, a broken twig, a patch of flattened grass. Everything told a story. After a short walk, Devlin stopped near a small ditch close to the water. "There," he said. "The second proof." The constables dug again. Within minutes, they found another envelope, white this time. Inside were documents belonging to Thomas Grantley. Aldridge felt anger and sorrow mix inside him. "Why hide these here?" he demanded. Devlin looked at the grey sky. "I wish to remember the men," he said softly. "A doctor never forgets the lives he uses." Miss Marple's voice was steady, but her eyes were sharp. "Mr. Devlin," she said, "you speak like a man who believes he has done nothing wrong." He smiled faintly. "Wrong? No, I helped many people. Some needed new organs, some needed money, and those drivers, well, they needed to be forgotten." Aldridge stepped forward angrily, but Miss Marple raised a hand and stopped him. "Inspector," she said gently, "anger will not open this man's mind. Calm questions will." She turned back to Devlin. "You chose this place for a reason. Why Hazelbrook Canal?" Devlin's eyes flickered with a quiet, chilling pride. "Because the canal keeps secrets, because its water is deep and its creatures are hungry. Nothing returns once given to it." The words hung heavy in the cold air. Miss Marple felt a slow, growing certainty. This man was not lying, this man was dangerous, and this man had chosen the canal long before anyone even knew his name. Miss Marple's quiet realization. As Devlin was taken back toward the police car, Miss Marple stood near the elder tree. The wind rustled the leaves softly, almost whispering. She whispered to Aldridge, "Inspector, this man planned every step. The false name, the calm manner, the distant roads, the canal. He is not acting out of madness, but out of method." Aldridge nodded grimly. "But why, Miss Marple? What purpose could these deaths serve?" Miss Marple looked at the calm water of the canal far ahead. "That," she said quietly, "is the question he wants us to ask. And when a criminal enjoys a question, the answer is always darker than we imagine." The chapter ends with Miss Marple standing alone beside the elder tree, the cold wind blowing past her, and the silent truth of the missing men resting beneath the surface of Hazelbrook Canal. Chapter 5. The Canal That Eats Its Dead. The discovery of the two envelopes spread across the village like a cold wind. People shut their doors earlier. Lanterns were kept burning long into the night. Mothers held their children close. Even the fields near Hazelbrook looked different now, darker, heavier, as if they held secrets beneath the soil. Miss Marple sat by the cottage window that evening, watching the sky turn from grey to black. Martha Willoughby placed a shawl gently around her shoulders. "You look troubled, Jane," Martha said softly. Miss Marple nodded. "I have seen many cruel things in my lifetime, my dear, but something about this business feels colder than usual. It is not simply murder, it is something planned, repeated, and carefully hidden." Martha shivered. "Do you think more men are missing?" Miss Marple looked out at the empty lane. "I think so," she said quietly, "and I fear the canal holds more than just water." Inspector Aldridge arrives. Late that night, someone knocked on the door. Martha opened it and found Inspector Aldridge standing outside, his lamp glowing weakly in the fog. "I'm sorry to come so late," he said, "but I need Miss Marple's mind on something urgent." Martha stepped aside. Miss Marple rose calmly and joined them both at the table. Aldridge placed a document on the surface. "This is a report from Palewood and 3 neighbouring towns. It lists drivers reported missing in the past 7 years. Miss Marple read the list slowly. Henry Carver, Thomas Grantley, and then 6 more names, 8 in total. Martha gasped. 8? 8 missing men?" Aldridge took a deep breath. "Yes, and most of them were last seen travelling toward the Hazelbrook area." Miss Marple closed her eyes for a moment. "Inspector," she said softly, "what if all these men share the same ending? What if the canal has been receiving victims long before Henry and Thomas?" Aldridge rubbed his forehead. "But why? What is the canal to him?" Miss Marple answered gently. "It is a place where things disappear forever." The next morning, Miss Marple, Inspector Aldridge, and 2 constables returned to the canal. Mist floated over the water like a thin blanket. The air smelled damp and metallic. Birds did not sing here. Even the reeds seemed afraid to move. Aldridge threw a small stone into the canal. It sank quickly without a ripple. "Deep," he murmured. Miss Marple stepped closer. "Inspector, please look at the banks." He followed her gaze. Soft marks in the mud, faint drag lines, small indentations seemed as if something heavy had been brought here many times. Aldridge bent down. "These are old, but they are marks." Miss Marple nodded slowly. "This place is not chosen by chance. Mr. Devlin knows the canal well. He knows how quickly it swallows things." The inspector's voice hardened. "We still need bodies to prove anything in court." Miss Marple touched his arm gently. "You may never find them. The water has its own secrets." Aldridge stared at her. "Then what are we supposed to do, Miss Marple?" She looked out over the silent water. "We must understand the man. Only then can we understand the crime." Miss Marple walked along the edge of the canal, her eyes scanning the ground with quiet attention. "Inspector," she called out, "please come here." He hurried over. She pointed at a small patch of disturbed soil, barely noticeable. "Devlin stood here recently. His shoes made this impression." Aldridge frowned. "You can tell that?" Miss Marple smiled gently. "My dear Inspector, years of gardening have taught me to recognize the weight of a footstep." Then she pointed to another faint mark. "And here, the heel of someone carrying weight." Aldridge stared, his face tightening. "Carrying a person?" "Carrying something heavy," Miss Marple said carefully. "And doing it often." Martha, who had come along for support, whispered, "How many times, Jane?" Miss Marple's expression was solemn. "Enough to form a path," she said. "Enough for the soil to remember even when people forget." Back at the station, Devlin sat in his chair, calm as ever. His hands rested neatly on his lap. His face showed no fear, no regret. Miss Marple stepped into the room. "I see you visited the canal again," Devlin said, almost pleased. Miss Marple did not reply. She sat across from him. "Mr. Devlin," she said softly, "the canal holds many secrets. How many men did you take there?" He tilted his head. "Enough." "Enough for what?" Miss Marple asked. Devlin's smile widened slightly. "Enough for my work, enough for my purpose." Aldridge slammed his fist on the table. "Tell us the truth." Devlin turned to him with the same gentle expression. "I already have," he said. "The water ate them. You will not find bodies. You will not find bones. The canal is my friend. It keeps my gifts." Martha, standing in the doorway, whispered, "Gifts?" Devlin looked at Miss Marple. "You are the clever one," he said. Tell them why the men had to disappear." Miss Marple's voice was steady, but her heart felt heavy. "Because," she said softly, "you needed their bodies for something you do not wish to explain." Devlin nodded slowly. Very good indeed." Aldridge stared at Miss Marple, alarmed. "Explain?" he demanded. "Explain what?" Miss Marple looked at him with sad eyes. "Inspector, I believe our Mr. Devlin is not only a murderer, he is a man who used the dead for his own purpose, something medical." Devlin's smile widened. "You see," he said. "She understands." As they left the room, the wind outside picked up, rattling the windows of the station. Miss Marple stopped at the door and looked toward the direction of Hazelbrook Canal. Martha asked quietly, "Jane, what do you think he did?" Miss Marple answered in a low voice, "Something far worse than murder." The canal waited silently, as if listening, and Miss Marple knew the darkest part of the truth was still hidden beneath its calm, cold surface. Chapter 6. The Doctor with a Broken Past. Inspector Aldridge had ordered Devlin back into his cell, but the man walked there as calmly as if he were entering a church. His quiet steps echoed in the corridor, and every constable who saw him felt a strange discomfort. Evil men usually shouted, protested, or tried to run, but this one smiled politely and moved like a man with no fear left inside him. Miss Marple stood near the doorway, watching him. She did not blink. She did not move. She simply observed him the way one studies a poisonous flower, dangerous, but strangely silent. When the door clanged shut behind him, Inspector Aldridge turned to Miss Marple. "Jane," he said, rubbing his forehead, "I don't understand him. What kind of man speaks like that?" Miss Marple replied softly, "A man who no longer sees the value of a human life, Inspector. A man who has replaced kindness with a purpose we do not yet know." Aldridge sighed. "We need answers, real answers, and we need them soon." Miss Marple nodded. "Then we must look backward before we can walk forward." And so they began searching through village records, medical files, old newspaper articles, and police reports from nearby counties. The work was slow and tiring, but Miss Marple had the patience of someone who had spent her life solving puzzles hidden inside ordinary days. By late afternoon, they found something. It was a dusty medical certificate from a distant town, Devlin's real name. Inspector Aldridge read it twice. "He was a doctor?" "Yes," Miss Marple said quietly. "And not a young one. Someone who trained long ago and practiced for years. That explains his calmness. He has the hands and mind of a man who once healed others." Aldridge frowned. "Then why would he kill?" Miss Marple looked at the document again. "He did not always kill. He began with healing, but something, Inspector, must have broken him." Hours later, they found the next clue. An article about a medical scandal dated 17 years earlier. A hospital had been shut down. A kidney transplant racket had been uncovered. Several doctors fled before arrest. At the bottom of the article, half smudged but readable, was a name. Dr. Arthur Denholm. Missing? Aldridge stared at it, stunned. "So he was part of an organ racket?" Miss Marple nodded slowly. "Yes. And he did not flee because of guilt. He fled because he knew he could continue his work elsewhere." "Alone?" Aldridge sank into his chair. "So that's why he needed the men?" "Indeed," Miss Marple said. "The drivers were not chosen for who they were. They were chosen because they were alone, far from home, and easily persuaded to travel to empty places. Once they were gone, no one would look in the right direction." Aldridge swallowed. "And the canal?" Miss Marple looked out of the window. The sky outside was fading into a pale grey evening. "The canal," she said gently, "is the perfect place for a man like him. Deep water, strong currents, hungry creatures. A place where the dead vanish without leaving even a bone." A shiver ran down Martha Willoughby's spine. "Jane! He used them, used their bodies." Miss Marple touched Martha's hand. "Yes, I fear he did." Inspector Aldridge pushed away from the desk. "But how did he live all these years without being caught? Why didn't anyone recognize him?" Miss Marple knew the answer before he finished speaking. "A doctor who has lost everything does not disappear into darkness," she said softly. "He creates a new face for himself. People believe what they want to believe. Sometimes a gentle smile and a soft voice can hide a wolf for years." Aldridge walked to the window and looked toward the distant hills. "He fooled everyone, Miss Marple." She nodded. "He fooled them because he hid not behind lies, but behind kindness. A very old trick, Inspector, and a very successful one." They continued reading through the files until something new appeared. A police note about a small village far from Renshaw Fold. The note described a kind healer who claimed to help the sick for free. Villagers adored him. They called him a saint. Miss Marple felt a cold certainty settling in her chest. "That saint," she whispered, "was Devlin. He did not stop after killing. He changed his mask." Aldridge stared at her. "But why pretend to be a saint?" Miss Marple gave him a sad smile. "Because, my dear Inspector, nothing protects a criminal better than the trust of innocent people. He used his medical knowledge to cure some and to hide others." Aldridge paced the room. We must find out how long he lived under that fake identity, and who helped him. Miss Marple lifted one hand gently. Inspector, some men need no help. They survive by using the faith of those around them. He looked at her. Do you think he will confess more? No, Miss Marple said. He has already told us what he wanted to. He enjoys watching us search for what he knows we cannot find. Aldridge lowered his head. So what do we do now? Miss Marple answered in a calm, firm tone. We must look for the places he lived, the people he fooled, the small signs of a doctor pretending to be something else. Somewhere in his past, the full truth waits for us. A slight breeze touched the window pane, and Miss Marple felt the weight of the mystery pressing upon her. Dr. Arthur Denholm, a healer turned killer, a man who hid behind gentle words and quiet hands, a man who saw the canal as a partner, not a threat. The chapter ended with Miss Marple whispering to herself, "A man like him does not simply end his crimes. He pauses. He waits. And then he begins it again." Chapter 7. The Saint of Rumsfield Abbey. The next days brought a surprising calm to Devlin's behaviour. He remained polite, soft-spoken and almost peaceful inside his cell. He ate his meals without complaint. He slept quietly. He asked for nothing. And yet Miss Marple felt certain that something in him was waiting, something patient, dark, and unfinished. Inspector Aldridge spent long hours searching old records and questioning nearby police stations. But every answer he found pointed to one truth. Devlin had lived many lives, and each one hid a part of his crimes. On a cold morning, a constable rushed into the station holding a telegram. "Sir," he cried, "a village priest from Rumsfield Abbey wrote to us. He says a man who fits Devlin's description lived there for 2 years, calling himself St. Amos." Aldridge straightened. 2 years? Miss Marple's eyes narrowed gently. "In a place of worship," she murmured. "How convenient for a man who wishes to hide in holiness." Aldridge sighed heavily. "Miss Marple, would you come with me to Rumsfield Abbey? You see things that I miss." Miss Marple gave a faint smile. "Of course, Inspector. A quiet abbey often keeps louder secrets than people imagine." They prepared the motor car, and within an hour they headed toward Rumsfield. The road wound through fields, stone walls and open hills. Soon the tall, grey building of the abbey appeared in the distance, its old bell tower rising like a finger pointing toward the cold sky. When they arrived, a thin old priest greeted them with nervous hands. "Thank heavens you came," he whispered. "We never imagined our Amos could be a criminal. He lived among us like a saint." Miss Marple watched the priest carefully. "What did he do here?" she asked. "He helped the sick," the priest replied quickly. "People travelled from other villages to see him. He never charged money. He prayed for them. He gave herbs, medicine, comfort." Aldridge frowned. "Medicine? Did he have training?" The priest nodded. "He said he learned healing arts from travelling monks. His hands were steady, his voice gentle. People trusted him." Miss Marple looked around the abbey courtyard, the stone benches, the quiet garden, the small room where monks stored herbs. A perfect hiding place, a perfect disguise, a perfect mask. "Did he ever leave the abbey at night?" Miss Marple asked softly. The priest hesitated. "Yes, sometimes. He said he went for walks near the water." Aldridge stiffened. "The water?" "Yes," the priest whispered. "The Hazelbrook Canal." Miss Marple closed her eyes briefly. The pieces were fitting together too well. They asked the priest to show them Amos's old room. It was a simple stone cell, a bed, a desk, a prayer book, a wooden box. Miss Marple opened the box gently. Inside lay several folded robes, a bottle of dried herbs, and a thin silver knife. Aldridge swallowed hard. "A knife?" Miss Marple lifted it with care. The blade was narrow and sharp. "This is a medical scalpel," she said quietly. "Used by surgeons." The priest gasped. But he told us it was for cutting herbs. Miss Marple placed it back in the box. My dear sir, a man like him knows exactly what story to tell. People believe what fits their hopes. Aldridge found a drawer in the desk. Inside were small notebooks, some blank, some filled with neat handwriting. Miss Marple read a few lines, patient names, ailments, strange coded notes that looked like measurements, and at the bottom of one page, a single line, "The canal will always protect me." Aldridge clenched his fists. He used the Abbey as shelter while continuing his crimes. Miss Marple nodded slowly. Yes, and by acting like a holy man, he made sure no one questioned him. Villagers would never suspect someone who prays with them. They returned to the chapel hall. Villagers had gathered outside, their faces pale and fearful. One woman spoke in a trembling voice. "Miss, he cured my daughter's fever. He blessed our home. How could someone good do something so terrible?" Miss Marple looked at her kindly. "People are not only good or bad, my dear. Some carry kindness in one hand and cruelty in the other. And they choose which hand the world sees." Aldridge stepped forward to speak to the villagers, but Miss Marple touched his arm. "Inspector," she said softly, "look at their faces. They feel betrayed. This betrayal will help us understand the depth of his disguise." Aldridge nodded. "Then what now, Miss Marple? How do we move forward?" Miss Marple looked toward the hills and the silent canal beyond them. "We must return to Devlin," she said. "We must make him believe we understand him, so he reveals the last missing piece." Aldridge frowned. "You want to speak to him again?" Miss Marple smiled gently, a smile filled with quiet confidence. "A criminal who hides behind holiness is proud, Inspector. Pride always cracks when someone recognizes the pattern behind it." They left the Abbey, the villagers standing in stunned silence, unable to believe the truth. Miss Marple gazed at the distant water, her expression thoughtful. "A saint to some," she whispered, "a murderer to others, and a puzzle only patience can solve." As their motor car rolled back toward Renshaw Fold, Miss Marple knew that the final confrontation was coming. She felt the weight of it in her bones, the strange stillness before the truth breaks open like a storm. She folded her hands neatly in her lap. "It is time," she said softly, "for Mr. Devlin to tell us the last chapter of his own story." And the road ahead seemed darker than ever. Chapter 8. Miss Marple Breaks the Silence. Evening shadows stretched across the walls of the Renshaw Fold police station as Miss Marple took her usual seat across from Devlin. The room was quiet, almost too quiet. A single lamp glowed above the table, casting a circle of pale yellow light. Devlin sat calmly, hands folded, his eyes half closed, as if he were meditating. There was no fear in his expression, no guilt, only a strange peace, the kind that frightened Miss Marple far more than anger ever could. Inspector Aldridge stood near the door, tense but silent. He trusted Miss Marple now. He had seen how criminals, even the most confident ones, spoke too much when she was near. Miss Marple looked at Devlin gently as though he were a schoolboy caught in mischief rather than a man linked to dozens of vanishings. "Mr. Devlin," she began softly, "we visited Rumsfield Abbey today." Devlin opened his eyes. A thin smile appeared. "Did you now? A peaceful place. The villagers loved me." "Yes," Miss Marple replied, "because you knew exactly what they needed. A humble healer, a man who asked for nothing. People give trust freely to those who pretend not to want it." Devlin chuckled. "Ah, Miss Marple, you see through everything, always." "But I still needed one last truth," she continued. "Why did the disappearances begin? What turned you towards such dreadful acts?" For the first time, Devlin looked annoyed. "You think everything begins with some great tragedy. It doesn't. Sometimes men simply make choices." "Not you," Miss Marple said kindly. "Your choices came from fear, and from a wound that you never let heal." Devlin leaned forward slightly, interested. Miss Marple continued, her voice calm and steady. You lost a great sum of money in your early years. It frightened you. It made you believe the world had robbed you. And from that thought came another, that you had the right to take from the world in return. Not money first, but people, their lives, their safety. Devlin's face twitched, a tiny movement, but enough to confirm she was correct. Aldridge stepped closer. Why the canal, Devlin? Why always the canal? Devlin looked amused. Because it is clever, he said, simply. Because it leaves no traces. Because the water does the work for you. Miss Marple folded her hands neatly on the table. But it did leave traces, very small ones, a buried envelope, a notebook line, a habit of returning to water even when you lived like a saint. Devlin's eyes grew darker, sharper. You know everything, Miss Marple, so tell me, what do you think of me? Miss Marple looked at him for a long moment. Her expression was neither angry nor frightened. It was full of something far more dangerous to a man like Devlin. Truth. I think, she said gently, you are a frightened child who grew into a clever man, but cleverness without conscience becomes cruelty. You learned how to hide your fear, your greed, your anger. You created a mask for every place you lived, a doctor, a priest, a saint. But underneath each mask, the same hunger lived on. Devlin's fingers tightened around each other. You make me sound like a monster. No, Miss Marple said softly. Monsters do not pretend to be kind. You did. And that is what makes your story tragic, not frightening. Aldridge cleared his throat. We have enough evidence now, Devlin. Enough to ensure you never leave prison again. But Devlin did not look at Aldridge. He kept his eyes on Miss Marple. You think you understand, but you don't, he said slowly. You don't know why I stopped. Miss Marple tilted her head. Because you were tired. Devlin froze. Tired of hiding, tired of pretending, tired of being everyone except yourself. Even wickedness becomes heavy when carried for too long. Devlin stared at her with something almost like respect. She continued gently. And you wanted someone to see the truth, not the saint, not the healer, not the driver. Her voice lowered. You wanted someone to see the man behind all the disguises. Devlin leaned back, defeated, not by force, but by recognition. You are the only person, he whispered, who ever spoke to me like that. Aldridge stepped forward sharply. Enough. Devlin, we have the confession, the notebooks, the buried identification, and the witness statements. You will be presented in court. But Devlin's eyes were still on Miss Marple. Tell me, he said faintly, what becomes of a man like me? Miss Marple looked at him with surprising gentleness. That depends on the man you choose to be in the time you have left, she answered. But the fear you tried to bury will always find its way back unless you face it honestly. Devlin lowered his gaze, and for the first time his mask cracked. Aldridge signalled the constables. They took Devlin away, his steps slow, almost uncertain. The door shut behind him with a hollow echo. The room felt suddenly larger, colder. Aldridge let out a long breath. Miss Marple, how did you know the truth about his past, his fear, his pride? Miss Marple smiled softly. My dear Inspector, people can hide documents and identities, but they cannot hide patterns in how they speak, in how they look at the world, in how they choose their victims. Each choice reveals a piece of the soul. They walked out into the night air. The quiet village lay under a silver moon, and the sound of distant water reached them. The canal, moving slowly in the dark. Aldridge looked toward it uneasily. That place. It feels cursed now. Miss Marple shook her head. Not cursed, Inspector, only misunderstood. A place becomes terrible when terrible acts are hidden there. Now that the truth is known, the water is only water again. She adjusted her shawl as a cool breeze passed. Evil rarely begins with grand plans, she said softly. Often it begins with a single desperate choice, and grows because no one notices early enough. Aldridge nodded. And thank you, Miss Marple, for noticing. Miss Marple gave a faint laugh. "I simply observe what others hurry past." They stood together for a quiet moment, listening to the wind and the distant movement of the canal. The mystery was solved, the masks removed, and the long silence broken at last. Finally, Miss Marple turned toward the station steps. "Come, Inspector," she said gently. "There is a pot of tea waiting somewhere in this village, and I dare say we both deserve a cup." And with that, the night seemed a little lighter, the air a little clearer, and the canal, once feared, flowed peacefully in the distance.